September 12, 1944, 3:17 p.m., near Aachen, Germany. Oberst Friedrich von Müller lowered his binoculars and laughed. From his concealed observation post in the Siegfried Line fortifications, the veteran Wehrmacht logistics officer had just witnessed what he considered the ultimate proof of American military incompetence. Through gaps in the smoke and haze, he'd counted American supply trains, 17 of them visible simultaneously, stretching back toward Belgium as far as his optics could see. Each train consisted of 40 to 50 cars loaded with supplies, equipment, ammunition, and fuel. The train sat stationary on tracks that converged at a massive rail yard the Americans had built seemingly overnight. "Look at this disaster," von Müller said to his aide, passing the binoculars. "The Americans have created the world's largest traffic jam. 17 trains waiting to unload because they have no organization, no efficiency, no understanding of proper logistics management. This is what happens when amateurs try to fight a war in Europe." Von Müller had spent 4 years managing Wehrmacht logistics across Europe. He'd coordinated supply operations from France to Russia. He understood that modern armies moved on rails, and rail logistics required meticulous planning, careful scheduling, and German-style organizational precision. What he was observing through his binoculars violated every principle of German logistics doctrine. The Americans had trains stacked up like toys. They'd built rail yards in open terrain vulnerable to artillery. They'd created bottlenecks any competent logistics officer could have avoided. It was, in von Müller's professional assessment, a catastrophic failure of basic supply management. "This confirms what headquarters has been saying," von Müller concluded. "American logistics cannot sustain operations in Germany. Their supply lines are overextended, their organization is chaotic, and their methods are primitive. They'll culminate within days. Then we counterattack while they're paralyzed by their own incompetence." What von Müller didn't know, what German military intelligence had completely failed to understand, was that he wasn't witnessing American logistics failure. He was witnessing American logistics success on a scale German doctrine couldn't comprehend. Those 17 trains weren't stuck in a traffic jam. They were part of a continuous flow system, moving 20,000 tons of supplies daily through that single rail yard. What looked like chaos to German eyes was actually organized abundance. American forces, delivering more supplies in one day than the entire Wehrmacht in the West received in a week. Within 48 hours, von Müller would watch in disbelief as those trains unloaded, departed, and were replaced by 17 more. Within a week, American forces his headquarters predicted would culminate would instead be advancing with full supplies. Within a month, he would be a prisoner, captured by forces he'd mocked for logistics incompetence. This is the story of how American logistics revolutionized modern warfare, how abundance defeated efficiency, and how German officers' mockery turned to shock as trains stretching beyond the horizon proved that American industrial power could overwhelm German tactical brilliance. To understand why German officers mocked American logistics, you need to understand German logistics doctrine, a system built on efficiency, precision, and making limited resources go as far as possible through meticulous management. German logistics philosophy emphasized efficiency over abundance, every resource carefully managed, nothing wasted, maximum output from minimum input. German quartermasters calculated precisely how much fuel, ammunition, and supplies each unit needed. Deliveries matched requirements exactly, with minimal excess. Centralized control. All logistics managed through a hierarchical command structure, with careful planning and scheduling. German logistics officers operated like orchestra conductors, coordinating complex movements through precise timing and coordination. Rail-dependent supply. German military doctrine recognized that modern armies required rail transportation. Trucks were supplements, trains were the backbone. German logistics officers prided themselves on efficient rail operations. Quality over quantity. German equipment was designed to be repairable, maintainable, and long-lasting. Better to have fewer high-quality vehicles that lasted than many low-quality vehicles that broke down. This philosophy worked brilliantly when Germany controlled the initiative. During the 1940 invasion of France, German logistics supported rapid advances through careful planning and efficient execution. During early Russian campaigns, German quartermasters performed near miracles, keeping armies supplied across vast distances. But by 1944, German logistics was collapsing under Allied bombing, fuel shortages, and infrastructure destruction. German rail networks were being systematically destroyed. Locomotive production couldn't replace losses. Rolling stock was worn out, with no replacements available. Fuel shortages meant trains sat idle even when tracks were available. German logistics officers watching American supply operations in France couldn't comprehend what they were seeing because American methods violated every principle of German doctrine. General Major Wilhelm von Thoma, captured in North Africa and later interviewed about logistics, explained the German perspective. We Germans understood logistics as a science requiring precision, planning, and careful resource management. We calculated exactly what units needed and delivered precisely that amount through carefully coordinated movements. American logistics appeared chaotic to us: massive oversupply, apparent waste, duplicate systems, and redundancy everywhere. We interpreted this as incompetence. We were wrong. Americans weren't incompetent. They were operating under completely different assumptions. They assumed abundance, not scarcity. They designed systems for volume, not efficiency. We mocked what we didn't understand. American military logistics in World War II represented a fundamental departure from European military tradition. Rather than managing scarcity efficiently, Americans created abundance through industrial mass production. The U.S. military logistics system was built on principles that seemed wasteful to German officers, but proved devastatingly effective. Abundance over efficiency. Produce so much that waste doesn't matter. American factories produced supplies in quantities that guaranteed surpluses. Units never ran out because supply chains delivered far more than minimum requirements. Redundancy over optimization. Build backup systems for backup systems. If one supply route failed, 3 others existed. If one vehicle broke down, 10 replacements were available. American logistics accepted inefficiency to eliminate single points of failure. Standardization over customization. Build everything to standard specifications so parts were interchangeable. American vehicles used common components. Ammunition was standardized across units. The sacrifice some performance for massive gains in supportability. Speed over precision. Move supplies fast, even if it means moving too much. American logistics prioritized getting supplies forward quickly over calculating exact requirements. Units received excess supplies rather than waiting for precisely calculated deliveries. The Red Ball Express, the emergency truck convoy system that supplied Patton's advance across France, embodied American logistics philosophy. It violated every principle of German efficiency. Trucks ran without proper maintenance schedules. Drivers operated on dangerously little sleep. Fuel consumption was astronomical. Accident rates were high. But the Red Ball delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily, over 400 miles for 82 days. By German standards, this should have been impossible. By American standards, it was acceptable cost of maintaining operational momentum. The rail systems that replaced the Red Ball Express were even more impressive. American military railway operations in Europe eventually delivered 20 million tons of supplies through restored French and Belgian rail networks. Networks American engineers rebuilt faster than German forces had destroyed them. American military railway statistics, Europe 1944 to 1945. Track rebuilt, 23,000 kilometers. Bridges rebuilt, 2,400. Locomotives provided, 1,650 from U.S. production. Freight cars provided, 20,000. Daily tonnage moved peak, 700,000 tons. Personnel operating railways, 48,000. Time to rebuild average bombed rail yards, 72 hours. These numbers represented logistics on a scale German military had never attempted. But raw numbers don't capture the philosophical difference. Americans weren't trying to optimize efficiency. They were creating systems so abundant that inefficiency didn't matter. What German officers interpreted as American chaos was actually organized abundance operating at scales German doctrine couldn't process. When Oberst von Müller observed 17 trains backed up at the rail yard near Aachen, he saw failure. What he didn't see was the system those trains represented. The 17 visible trains were part of a continuous flow of 50-plus trains operating through that sector daily. Trains didn't wait because of poor planning, they waited because American logistics doctrine accepted queue time as a cost of maintaining continuous supply flow. The rail yard von Müller thought was poorly planned was actually built deliberately oversized. American engineers designed rail facilities with 200% excess capacity, ensuring that damage, maintenance, or surges in demand never created actual bottlenecks. The visible vulnerability to German artillery was deliberate risk acceptance. Americans built rail yards close to the front because speed mattered more than perfect security. They accepted that some yards would be damaged and simply rebuilt them. The apparent duplication of facilities meant Americans had built 3 parallel supply routes where Germans would have built one optimized route. If one route was damaged, 2 others immediately absorbed the load with minimal disruption. German observers interpreted all this as incompetence because German doctrine would never accept such waste. But American logistics wasn't about avoiding waste. It was about ensuring supply continuity regardless of circumstances. Major General John C.H. Lee, commanding U.S. Army logistics in Europe, explained the philosophy in a 1944 report. German logistics is elegant and efficient when everything works as planned. American logistics is redundant and apparently wasteful. But war doesn't go as planned. Bridges get destroyed, rail lines get bombed, vehicles break down, weather disrupts schedules. German logistics becomes paralyzed when plans fail. American logistics continues functioning because we've built so much excess capacity that failures don't matter. We can lose 30% of our capability and still deliver more supplies than German forces receive at full capability. This abundance-based approach required industrial production capacity German military simply didn't possess in 1944. American factories were producing transportation equipment monthly, 1944. Locomotives, 120. Freight cars, 2,500. Trucks, 75,000. Tires, 8 million. Spare parts, enough to rebuild entire vehicle fleets multiple times. Germany couldn't match these production numbers. German factories in 1944 were producing perhaps 10% of American transportation equipment output while simultaneously being bombed and losing territory. This disparity meant American forces could accept logistics practices that would cripple German forces. Americans could abandon damaged vehicles rather than repair them because replacements were abundant. They could operate trucks until they broke rather than following careful maintenance schedules because new trucks arrived constantly. They could use fuel liberally because supply was effectively unlimited. German officers who actually witnessed American logistics operations up close experienced cognitive dissonance between what they'd been taught and what they observed. Oberst Fritz Fulriedi, captured in September 1944 and held at Allied logistics bases before being transferred to POW camps, described his experience in post-war interviews. "I was held at an American supply depot for 3 days while awaiting transport. I watched their operations. Trains arrived continuously, not occasionally, continuously. Every 3 hours a train pulled in, unloaded, and departed. The unloading was mechanized. Forklifts, cranes, conveyor systems. What would take German workers hours was accomplished in minutes. Then trucks, hundreds of trucks arrived, loaded supplies, and drove toward the front in constant convoys. I realized this wasn't disorganized chaos. This was organized abundance. They'd created industrial-scale logistics that operated like factory assembly lines. We Germans had nothing comparable." Fulriedi's observation about mechanization was particularly significant. American logistics was heavily mechanized in ways German logistics wasn't. American versus German logistics mechanization. For cliffs at supply depots, Americans had thousands, Germans had dozens. Mechanical loading equipment, Americans used extensively, Germans relied on manual labor. Truck-mounted cranes, standard on American vehicles, rare on German vehicles. Automated fuel dispensing, common in American systems, manual in German systems. Mechanical sorting equipment. American depots used conveyor systems, German depots used hand sorting. This mechanization meant Americans could move supplies faster with fewer personnel. American supply depots processed tons per hour that German depots would need days to handle. This speed advantage compounded at every stage. American supplies moved from factories to frontline units in a fraction of the time comparable German supplies required. But the real shock for German observers was the sheer volume. Major Werner Kortenhaus, a Panzer officer captured in December 1944, witnessed American logistics during transport to POW camps. "We traveled by American military train from France to England. I saw American supply operations along the route. Every rail yard was stacked with supplies, mountains of crates, vehicles, ammunition, fuel drums. Every siding had trains waiting to move forward. I calculated that what I saw in one American rail yard exceeded total supplies available to my entire Panzer division. I realized then that we'd been fighting an enemy whose logistics capacity made our own look primitive. No amount of German tactical skill could overcome such material superiority. The operation that definitively proved American logistics superiority was the Rhine crossing campaign of March-April 1945. German commanders had assumed that crossing the Rhine would require months of preparation and massive logistics buildup. Americans crossed in days and sustained operations immediately. The Rhine River was 1,200 feet wide at most crossing points. Bridging it required enormous logistics effort: pontoon bridges, ferry systems, supply stockpiles, fuel reserves, ammunition stores. German defensive doctrine assumed this logistics preparation would take weeks, giving German forces time to prepare defenses. Instead, American engineers crossed the Rhine and established operational bridges in less than 48 hours at multiple locations simultaneously. The logistics to support this operation, moving supplies across new bridges to forces advancing into Germany, required capabilities German logistics officers considered impossible. At Remagen, where Americans captured an intact bridge, logistics operations demonstrated American abundance at maximum scale. Remagen Bridge Logistics, March 7th to 17th, 1945. Supplies moved across bridge, 25,000 tons. Vehicles crossed, 25,000. Troops crossed, 8,000 per day. Support bridges built, 3, pontoon and treadway. Time to establish alternative crossings after main bridge collapsed, 36 hours. Disruption to supply flow when main bridge collapsed, minimal. Alternative bridges absorbed traffic. The ability to lose a major bridge and have supply operations continue with minimal disruption shocked German observers. German logistics would have been paralyzed by such loss. American logistics simply routed traffic through backup systems that were already in place. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr Division, surrendered in April 1945. His interrogation report captured German realization of American logistics superiority. We calculated that American forces crossing the Rhine would require weeks to establish supply lines supporting further advances. Instead, they crossed and immediately continued offensive operations with full support. We saw supply convoys moving across new bridges within hours of completion. We saw supply dumps being established in captured German territory before defensive forces had even been defeated. This violated everything we understood about logistics timelines. Americans seemed to have unlimited trucks, unlimited supplies, unlimited ability to move resources forward. We couldn't compete with this. While American logistics was operating at peak efficiency, German logistics was collapsing under accumulated damage and resource exhaustion. By late 1944, German military logistics faced cascading failures. Rail system destruction, Allied bombing had destroyed thousands of kilometers of track, hundreds of bridges, and numerous rail yards. Repairs were temporary. Bombers returned and destroyed repairs within days. Locomotive shortage. Germany entered the war with 23,000 locomotives. By December 1944, only 8,000 remained operational. Production couldn't replace losses. Many locomotives sat idle for lack of coal or skilled crews. Fuel crisis. German synthetic fuel production was being destroyed by Allied bombing. Fuel allocations to military were cut repeatedly. Units received 20 to 30% of required fuel. Vehicles sat immobilized. Rolling stock attrition. Freight cars were wearing out faster than they could be replaced. Damaged cars couldn't be repaired for lack of spare parts. Serviceable cars were concentrated on highest priority routes, leaving secondary routes paralyzed. Manpower shortage. Experienced logistics personnel were being conscripted for combat units. Replacements were elderly men, wounded soldiers, and forced laborers who lacked training and motivation. The result was German military operating with logistics capacity, perhaps 20% of 1940 levels, while American logistics was operating at 300% of 1940 American capacity. Oberst von Müller, the logistics officer who'd mocked American rail congestion in September 1944, wrote a very different assessment in February 1945 as German forces retreated. Our logistics has collapsed completely. We receive perhaps one supply train per week where we need 10. Fuel allocations are 10% of requirements. Ammunition is rationed to the point that artillery batteries are forbidden to fire except at confirmed targets. Meanwhile, American forces we're fighting show no supply constraints. They fire artillery without apparent ammunition limits. They operate vehicles continuously. They have fuel for everything. The disparity is crushing. We're fighting 1945 war with 1940 logistics, while Americans are fighting with logistics capacity we never possessed even at our peak. Behind the statistics were German soldiers experiencing supply failures that undermined combat effectiveness and morale. Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, serving with the 352nd Infantry Division in the Ardennes, wrote in his diary about supply problems during the Battle of the Bulge. December 18, 1944. We've been advancing for 3 days on captured American supplies. Our own logistics couldn't support this offensive. We're using captured American fuel, captured American rations, captured American ammunition. But we're running out. American supply depots we capture are enormous. More supplies in a single depot than our entire division receives in a month. But we can't move these supplies forward because we lack trucks and fuel. Meanwhile, American forces we're fighting receive continuous supply. They never seem to run out of ammunition. Their artillery fires constantly. We ration single shells. This disparity makes me question whether victory is possible. The Battle of the Bulge was actually designed around German logistics limitations. The offensive plan assumed German forces would capture American fuel supplies because German fuel allocations couldn't support sustained offensive operations. When American forces prevented the capture of key supply depots, German armored forces literally ran out of fuel and were abandoned by crews. In contrast, American forces defending during the Bulge received continuous supply through the crisis. Bastogne, surrounded by German forces, was supplied by airdrops until ground supply routes reopened. American logistics ensured even surrounded units had ammunition, medical supplies, and food. The psychological impact on German soldiers was devastating. Unteroffizier Hans Müller, captured in March 1945, described the effect in POW interrogations. By early 1945, we knew we were beaten not by American tactical superiority, but by American material superiority. We couldn't compete with enemy who had unlimited supplies. Our tanks sat immobilized for lack of fuel while American tanks operated continuously. Our artillery rationed ammunition while American artillery fired thousands of rounds daily. Our soldiers were hungry while American prisoners we captured ate better than we did. This knowledge destroyed morale. Why fight when enemy has such overwhelming material advantage? Perhaps the single most impressive American logistics achievement was rebuilding European rail networks faster than German forces had destroyed them. The U.S. Army Transportation Corps established the military railway service specifically to restore and operate railways in liberated territory. This organization accomplished engineering feats German military observers considered impossible. Railway restoration achievements: track restored to operation, 23,000 kilometers. 14,300 miles. Average daily track restoration rate, 125 kilometers. Bridges rebuilt, 2,400. Largest bridge rebuilt, Nijmegen Rail Bridge, 1,800 feet, reconstructed in 96 hours. Rail yards rebuilt, 400 plus. Locomotives provided from U.S. production, 1,650. Freight cars provided, 20,000. Time to establish operational rail network in France, 90 days after D-Day. These numbers represented engineering and logistics coordination at scales German military had never attempted, even at peak capability. The Nijmegen Bridge reconstruction particularly shocked German engineers. German forces had destroyed the bridge thoroughly, dropping spans into the river, destroying approach ramps, and demolishing switching yards. German engineers estimated reconstruction would require 6 to 8 months minimum. American engineers rebuilt it in 4 days. They used prefabricated bridge spans manufactured in the United States and shipped to Europe. They used heavy equipment Germans didn't possess. They worked 24-hour shifts with mechanized construction methods, and they delivered a bridge carrying 300 trains daily within a week of completion. Oberst Heinrich Weber, a German military engineer captured in Holland, witnessed the Nijmegen reconstruction. I observed American engineers rebuilding Nijmegen Bridge. They worked with speed and mechanization we couldn't match. They used prefabricated components, entire bridge sections built in factories and assembled on site. They had cranes, pile drivers, welding equipment, and concrete mixers we'd seen only in propaganda films about American industry. They completed in days what would require months using German methods. This confirmed what I'd suspected. American logistics wasn't just larger in scale than ours. It was more advanced technologically and organizationally. The final offensive into Germany in March to May 1945 demonstrated American logistics at peak performance, supporting rapid advances that German logistics could never have sustained. American forces advanced 200 to 300 miles in some sectors between Rhine crossings in late March and German surrender in early May. This advance required moving supplies forward at rates matching the advance speed. Supplies couldn't lag behind advancing combat forces. American logistics met this challenge through methods German officers found incomprehensible. Aerial supply, C-47 transport aircraft dropped supplies directly to advancing units, bypassing ground supply lines entirely. Americans treated transport aircraft like flying trucks, delivering supplies wherever needed within hours. Truck convoys. The famous Red Ball Express methodology continued. Truck convoys running continuously, drivers operating on minimal rest, accepting high accident rates as cost of maintaining supply flow. Rolling supply dumps. Rather than establishing fixed supply depots, Americans created mobile depots that moved forward with advancing forces, reducing supply line length continuously. Priority allocation. American logistics could surge supplies to break through sectors within hours, concentrating resources where they'd have maximum impact, then redistributing when priorities changed. German forces retreating before American advances couldn't understand how American logistics kept pace. German doctrine said advancing forces should outrun supply lines, culminating in stopping to wait for logistics to catch up. American forces never seemed to culminate. They kept advancing with continuous supply. General Major Karl Wagner, Chief of Staff for Army Group B, surrendered in April 1945. His post-surrender assessment acknowledged American logistics superiority. "We lost this war not primarily through tactical defeats, but through logistics impossibility." American forces advanced continuously because their logistics supported continuous operations. Our forces retreated discontinuously because our logistics couldn't support defensive operations at multiple locations simultaneously. American abundance overwhelmed German efficiency. Their wasteful methods that we mocked proved more effective than our efficient methods because abundance matters more than efficiency when your industry can produce abundance. After the war, German military officers studying American logistics operations provided honest assessments that contradicted their wartime mockery. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, Chief of the Operations Staff of the Armed Forces High Command, wrote in his prison cell before execution, "We Germans prided ourselves on logistics efficiency and careful resource management. We mocked American logistics as wasteful and disorganized. We were correct that American methods were wasteful by our standards. But we were wrong to think our efficiency was superior. In total war, abundance defeats efficiency. Americans could waste resources we would carefully husband because they had so much more to begin with. One American supply train delivered more than 10 German trains. American waste still left them with more supplies than our efficiency provided us. This is lesson German military never learned until too late." Former German logistics officers interviewed by U.S. Army historians in 1945 to 1946 consistently expressed similar themes. Underestimation of American production capacity. German intelligence had estimated American industrial production at perhaps 150% of German levels. Actual American production was 300 to 400% of German levels in key categories. Misunderstanding of American logistics philosophy. German officers interpreted American redundancy and abundance as incompetence rather than deliberate system design. Failure to account for mechanization advantages. German logistics relied heavily on manual labor and horse-drawn transport. American logistics was almost entirely mechanized, providing speed advantages German methods couldn't match. Inability to adapt. German logistics doctrine emphasized efficiency because Germany lacked resources for abundance-based approaches. Even when German officers recognized American logistics superiority, German industrial capacity couldn't replicate American methods. Oberst von Müller, who'd mocked American logistics in September 1944, was captured in December 1944. His interrogation included detailed questions about his logistics assessment. Interrogator: in September, you reported to headquarters that American logistics was failing. By December, American forces were advancing with full supply. What changed? Von Müller: nothing changed. I was wrong in September. I interpreted what I saw through framework of German logistics doctrine. I saw apparent chaos and assumed it meant failure. I didn't understand that what looked like chaos was actually organized abundance operating at scales German doctrine never contemplated. Americans weren't failing at logistics. They were succeeding using methods didn't recognize as logistics because they violated everything I'd been taught. May 1995, Aachen, Germany. 50-year anniversary of VE Day. The German city hosted a commemoration attended by American and German veterans. Among them was former Lieutenant Colonel James Polk, who'd commanded an American military railway unit, and former Oberst Friedrich von Müller, now 89 years old. Through translators, they discussed the logistics operations von Müller had observed and misunderstood 50 years earlier. Von Müller spoke first. In September 1944, I stood in an observation post near here and watched American trains backed up at rail yards. I laughed at what I thought was American incompetence. I reported to headquarters that American logistics was failing and that enemy forces would soon culminate from supply shortages. I was completely wrong. Those trains I mocked were part of a logistics system that delivered more supplies in a single day than German forces in the West received in a week. My mockery was based on ignorance of the scale at which Americans were operating. Former Lieutenant Colonel Polk responded, German logistics was elegant and efficient. You managed scarce resources brilliantly. But American logistics wasn't about elegance, it was about abundance. We built systems with so much excess capacity that inefficiency didn't matter. We accepted waste, duplication, and apparent chaos because our industrial production meant we could afford it. Those 17 trains you saw were just a small portion of 50 trains moving through that sector daily. What looked like a traffic jam to you was normal operations to us. A younger German attendee studying military logistics at university asked, "What lesson should modern militaries learn from this?" Polk answered, "That logistics philosophy matters as much as logistics execution." German forces tried to fight efficiently with limited resources. American forces fought abundantly with massive resources. In total war between industrial powers, abundance wins. Modern militaries need both efficiency and abundance. But if forced to choose, abundance provides more operational flexibility. Von Müller added, "And never mock what you don't understand. I mocked American logistics because it violated my doctrinal expectations. That mockery prevented me from recognizing that Americans had developed a superior approach. Arrogance born from belief in German superiority blinded me to reality. This is the danger of institutional confidence. It makes you unable to learn from enemies who do things differently." The ceremony concluded with both sides acknowledging that American logistics had been as important to Allied victory as tactical operations, strategic bombing, or naval supremacy. Former U.S. Army Chief of Transportation, Major General Frank Ross, delivered closing words. German forces fought brilliantly with limited resources. They achieved remarkable results through efficiency and tactical skill, but they couldn't overcome American material abundance. We delivered supplies at rates German logistics couldn't match using methods German doctrine didn't recognize as possible. This logistics dominance enabled every American tactical success. You can't win battles without bullets, fuel, and food. American logistics ensured our forces never ran out of any of them. The American logistics achievement in World War II reshaped modern military understanding of supply operations. The abundance-based approach pioneered in 1944 to 1945 became the foundation for modern American military logistics doctrine. Final statistics. American logistics achievement, Europe 1944 to 1945. Total supplies delivered, 20 million tons. Peak daily delivery rate, 700,000 tons. Rail track restored, 23,000 kilometers. Locomotives provided 1,650, freight cars provided 20,000, trucks operated 250,000 plus. Supply depots established 400 plus, personnel in logistics units 350,000. German logistics decline 1944 to 1945. Rail capacity versus 1940, 20%. Fuel availability versus requirements, 10 to 30%. Locomotive availability versus 1940, 35%. Supply delivery versus requirements, 30 to 40%. Transportation equipment production versus losses, negative, losing more than produced. Comparative metrics. American daily supply delivery, 700,000 tons peak. German daily supply delivery, entire Western Front, approximately 100,000 tons. American trucks in Europe, 250,000. German trucks in West, approximately 50,000. American logistics personnel, 350,000. German logistics personnel, approximately 120,000. The story of American logistics in World War II is ultimately about how industrial abundance transformed military operations and how German mockery of inefficient American methods revealed failure. To understand that waste becomes irrelevant when production creates surplus. German officers mocked U.S. logistics in 1944 because American methods violated every principle of German doctrine. They saw trains backed up and assumed incompetence. They saw redundancy and assumed waste. They saw apparent chaos and assumed disorganization. They were wrong about everything. The trains weren't backed up, they were flowing continuously at rates German rail systems never achieved. The redundancy wasn't waste, it was insurance against disruption. The apparent chaos was organized abundance operating at industrial scale. Oberst von Müller had stood in his observation post in September 1944 and laughed at American logistics, confident that German efficiency would defeat American abundance. By December 1944, he was a prisoner, captured by forces supplied by the very system he'd mocked. His laughter had stopped when he realized that 17 trains stretching beyond the horizon weren't evidence of failure. They were evidence of success. Success at creating logistics systems so abundant that German tactical brilliance couldn't overcome American material superiority. The lesson extended beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, abundance matters more than efficiency. The military that can produce and deliver overwhelming material resources can afford inefficiency, waste, and redundancy. The military operating with scarcity cannot afford mistakes because every resource must be used optimally. Germany chose efficiency because scarcity forced that choice. America chose abundance because industrial capacity made abundance possible. When those philosophies clashed in 1944 to 1945, abundance won decisively. Modern American military logistics still follows abundance-based doctrine pioneered in World War II. Redundancy is built into every system. Excess capacity is considered necessary, not wasteful. Speed is prioritized over efficiency, and the U.S. military maintains logistics capabilities that dwarf any competitor. Because the lesson of 1944 was that overwhelming logistics superiority enables every other form of military advantage. German officers mocked U.S. logistics until they saw trains stretching beyond the horizon. Then they saw those trains deliver supplies that enabled American advances German forces couldn't stop. Then they learned that mockery based on doctrinal prejudice is a path to defeat when the enemy's doctrine is actually superior. The trains kept rolling, the supplies kept flowing, and American abundance overwhelmed German efficiency in every sector, every battle, every campaign. The mockery died somewhere between September 1944, when German officers laughed at American chaos, and May 1945, when Germany surrendered to forces supplied by logistics systems that German doctrine said couldn't exist. Those 17 trains von Müller had mocked were just the beginning, the first of thousands that would roll across Europe, delivering the material abundance that made American victory inevitable. German officers learned too late that trains stretching beyond the horizon weren't signs of failure. They were signs of American industrial power that German military efficiency could never overcome. The trains rolled on, the supplies flowed forward, and American logistics proved that abundance, not efficiency, wins industrial wars.